Good evening, everybody. This is Katje. Welcome to my YouTube channel. This evening I'm wearing my Michael Kors camouflage dress because I want to hunt tonight after a certain game. In particular, I want to hunt after the truth, after more clarity. I want to get something right that I think I haven't gotten quite right before. So before I get into that, let me model this look for you. I'm wearing the dress with these stiletto high heel, these stiletto black boots, and I'm complementing it with some accessories, some matching accessories. So here is the outfit. I'm also wearing black pantyhose, so I think this creates a kind of sharp, urban look that you could get a lot of use out of in a lot of different places. I really like this dress. I bought it in Scottsdale a few months ago, so it fits me quite well, and it's just really stylish. I love their clothes. Michael Kors makes really great stuff. It's a little expensive, but if you save up, every now and then it's really nice to purchase an outfit like that. So let me basically explain what I'm going to do this evening. What I would like to do is go back to this theology of Glasson Height that I have developed myself in previous work. Remember that in one of my previous videos, I subjected this to a kind of Nietzschean critique. So I want to go back and clarify that criticism. I think that what I had to say before was perhaps on the right track, but I think I can say what I was trying to say then a little more clearly now. And this is kind of the way things go when you're dealing with these kinds of issues in philosophy and theology. Often, you have to go back and revisit certain things. You have to live with them for a little while, sort of turn them over in your mind, and give them enough time to sort of germinate and to ripen. It's almost like a good crop has to ripen before you can glean it, before you can reap it. So that's what I want to try to do tonight. So let's begin by reminding ourselves of the basic idea of Glasson Height theology. So Glasson Height is a German word for letting be or releasement. That's one translation of it that I've encountered. And it's kind of a kind of energized tranquility. It's this experience of energized tranquility. There's a serenity or a tranquility or a letting be, releasement in Glasson Height, but it's not simply a passive, sort of bland, passive state. It also has energy in it. It's almost like if you had a ring of dancers who were dancing in a circle and who were doing so very confidently in a very relaxed manner, and yet they were alert. That's kind of the experience of Glasson Height, combining these elements of serenity or tranquility on the one hand with energy and activity on the other. Now, the Glasson Height theologian wants to say that our fundamental experience of divinity is Glasson Height, and the Glasson Height theologian uses this to explain how we can make decisions under the influence of Glasson Height, or the holy, or divinity, or God, understood as Glasson Height, this phenomenon of Glasson Height. So very basically, remember the basic idea is that through a kind of staple object, or it could also be something fictional, like a character we read about in a story, but something that we can revisit. It might be a lake, it might be a friend, it might be a character, but something that we can revisit over again through time functions as a kind of existential clock that we can use to become aware of certain changes that actually have transpired in our lives since the last time we checked the clock, or we might become aware of certain possible decisions or changes in the future, and so we can then wonder, well, should we pursue these changes? Should we embrace the changes? Should we reject them, or should we ignore them? So, I might go back to a park in the woods that I go to several times a year, and I might become aware of the possible change of becoming, let's say, an environmentalist. Maybe it becomes clear to me that one possibility that's open to me is to become involved in a local environmentalist movement dedicated to protecting the groundwater in the vicinity, and so now I have to make a decision about whether I should embrace or reject or ignore this change. And the Glasson Height theologian says, well, look, basically what should happen is you should only, if you want to follow the guidance of the holy, you should only embrace the change if you have the entire experience of Glasson Height. That is, if you have both the tranquility and the energy, the sense of energy. If you have the tranquility or the serenity without the energy, that's a kind of bland complacency. That doesn't really motivate anybody to do anything. If, on the other hand, you have the energy, the agitation, but without any sense of peace, without any sense of serenity, then that's turmoil. That's not really a good place from which one should make a decision. If you don't feel anything at all, then the change that's being held up for decision is probably irrelevant and should be ignored. But if both of those elements come together, you feel both tranquil and serene on the one hand, but you also feel excited and energized when those come together, when they weave together, and so that you experience the entire phenomenon of Glasson Height, then that's a sign, according to this theological perspective, that divinity is guiding you to embrace the change that you've held up for decision. So in this case, becoming an environmentalist. Now, let's go to the Nietzschean critique of that. And there were a number of things that I said about that. The whole idea of a stable object, or non-object is the case maybe, but something stable against which we could measure actual or possible changes. Nietzsche's very skeptical that there's anything like that. He thinks that's simply a projection on our part, or it's something, a fictional construction. There isn't anything really out there corresponding to that. That's one criticism that Nietzsche might make of this theological perspective. Another criticism that he might make is, well, look, the whole framework sort of presupposes, without calling into question, that certain changes would be good and other ones would be bad, or that certain things are desirable or other things are not. Maybe there's a kind of ethical or moral system that's being presupposed here. And as we know from previous discussions about Nietzsche, he's very skeptical about morality as sort of like an ultimate guide to how human beings, especially Übermenschen, should behave. Even though he's somewhat ambivalent on that topic, he might be skeptical about that. But I don't think that any of that is the fundamental criticism that Nietzsche would make of this theological perspective of Glasson Height that I've been describing. So what is the criticism? Now, previously, I've said things like, well, for Nietzsche, Glasson Height theology confuses the cause with the effect. And maybe that's okay as far as it goes, but I want to push that a little bit more, because I don't think that I described it previously very clearly, so I could understand if somebody didn't really follow what I had to say. So let me try to do a better job now. Let's look at another presupposition of this theological view, and that is it looks like, according to Glasson Height theology, this experience of Glasson Height is immediately accessible. We don't really have to do anything to prepare ourselves in order to receive it. It's sort of out there, immediately accessible to us, and so if we raise up a particular possibility or a particular change, maybe something that's happened in the past and we're trying to decide what to do about this change. Maybe I'm spending not as much time with my family and friends. Should I continue with that? Should I embrace that change? Or should I reject it and try to spend more time with them? Or the environmentalist example that I gave previously. The idea or the presupposition here seems to be, on the part of the Glasson Height theologian, that this sort of releasement, this kind of energized tranquility that the Glasson Height theologian identifies with God or with the holy, that's immediately accessible to us, and we can draw upon it, or various aspects of it, in order to determine whether a particular change in question should be ignored, accepted, or rejected. Now, there's something questionable. Why should we assume that? Why is this experience of Glasson Height immediately accessible to us. Now I can think of how that question might arise in a religious context. If we're coming at these matters from the perspective of Christian orthodoxy, it is very much a teaching of that faith tradition that human beings are sinful. They have committed actual sins, and they also find themselves in a condition of original sin from which they cannot extricate themselves. They cannot pull themselves up by their own bootstraps out of that, so to speak, without divine intervention of some kind. And then the question is, well, to what extent does human freedom cooperate with this divine intervention? That's a whole other set of questions that I don't want to get into tonight. But the point is that somebody like Martin Luther, for example, would say, well, human beings, as we find them right now, not in their maybe initial state when God first created them, but now they are in a state of sin that radically alienates them from divinity. Now, if that's the case, then it would follow that to the extent that divinity is being understood as Glasson Height, human beings would be radically alienated from it. They certainly would not have immediate access to it in order to make these decisions about actual and possible changes that they become aware of through the intervention, through the use of a kind of existential clock. It's not possible because they don't have any immediate access to divinity. Now, Nietzsche is not obviously a Christian. He's not a proponent of Christian orthodoxy, as I explained in, I think it was my last video or one of my earlier videos. He doesn't really want to have anything to do with Christianity, either as faith or any theological interpretation of it. But there is another question that he might ask from his perspective about this experience of Glasson Height. And this, well, look, he might also want to know, well, why is it that this experience is immediately accessible to us? And he actually might say, well, it is. He would reject the whole idea of sin as somehow alienating us from God or from Glasson Height. And he might say, well, no, we do have immediate access to this phenomenon. We do. But why is that? And here's where Nietzsche's critique, it seems to me, would go for the jugular vein. He would say, well, look, I'm not going to try to prove it, but I'm going to try to raise a skeptical possibility. How do we know that it's not the case? How can we rule out the possibility that the reason this experience of Glasson Height is so accessible to us is that it really doesn't have anything to do with some kind of divine, mysterious something out there. It's an internal instinct or experience internal to us. It's something very powerful life instinct that occurs within us it's almost physiological, for example, doesn't have anything to do with some kind of mysterious divine other. It has to do with something instinctual in us. And as I have said previously, what happens is that when we feel this instinct, when it's really coursing through us or active in us, then it causes us to engage in behaviors that are very positive. It causes us to embrace changes that are actually life-affirming, that are positive, that are healthy, that are fruitful, that bring happiness and joy. But the reason for that is because those behaviors, those positive, reinforcing, happy, joyful, and healthy behaviors flow from the internal instinct of Glasson Height. It's not that there's some kind of extrinsic divinity that is sort of putting its stamp of approval on the various changes, or at least some of the changes of which we become aware, or maybe rejecting others. It's that the instinct, the life instinct of Glasson Height that's part of us is, in the cases where we are drawn into to embrace changes, those are changes that are life-affirming, that sort of flow out of this internalized instinct. And when we don't accept a change, when we reject it, then that's because the change in question is not healthy, is not life-affirming. It may be a kind of degeneration or something that is deleterious to thriving human life. Or if the change is indifferent, well, it doesn't have any relevance whatsoever to life at all. It may be just like, well, I noticed that, a housefly just flew by. Well, big deal. What should I do about it? Should I chase after it? Should I ignore it? Well, it doesn't really matter, because whatever I do really isn't going to have any impact, positive or negative, on my life or anybody else's life, except in maybe rare cases where it might be carrying some kind of disease or whatever. But forget about that. So this to me is the gist, the core of the kind of Nietzschean criticism of Glasson Height theology that I was sort of trying to get at in previous videos, sort of fumbling my way around with a little bit. But now I think that I am in a position to explain in a much clearer manner how that criticism would go. And I think that's a very serious criticism. I think that in order to meet it, probably, maybe Glasson Height theology could be modified in some way to meet that criticism. That's a possible project that I leave to other people. But my own preferred way of dealing with this issue is to abandon Glasson Height theology, just as I would now abandon the so-called strike theology that sees our experience of God as fundamentally one of trying to wrest clarity from an enigmatic and obscure divinity. I would leave both of those theological alternatives behind now, even though I developed them previously. And what I would do is try to develop a new theological perspective, like the Kierkegaard-inflected one that I have described several times before. And then I would try to show that that particular perspective is not vulnerable to this Nietzschean critique or any of the other ones that I've described. It seems to me that that would be a better way to proceed. But one thing is sure, and this is the last thing that I will say about it tonight, and that is that we need to be crystal clear about what the core of this Nietzschean criticism of Glasson Height theology is before we can begin to deal with it if we are so inclined. And so that's what I tried to do tonight. I hope that you'll find it interesting, and I thank you for allowing me once again to indulge in my eccentricity, but I'm going to continue to do that, Lord willing, because, well, I like it, and I hope some of you find it interesting. If you don't, that's okay. To each his own, to each her own. But this is my own, and so I'm going to share that and hope that at least some of you will get some benefit out of it, will get some enjoyment out of it, and it will help to enrich your lives. So that's what I have to say. And until next time, this is your resident cross-dressing theologian, Katje, wishing everybody, as always, a very peaceful, safe, and restful good evening. I hope that all of you are doing well and are having a good summer. And so till next time, take care of yourselves and be good to each other. Bye-bye.